Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. Please welcome Dr. Timothy Keller.
Thank you. I'm here to try to talk to you about reasons people don't believe in Christianity, God in general, Christianity in particular, and reasons people do. And we increasingly live in a society in which more and more people consider themselves secular, more and more people consider themselves people without religious faith or without religious preference, and people who have very robust, orthodox, strong beliefs in supernatural religion. The mushy middle is going away. When I was growing up and my parents were growing up, people who didn't believe in God at all and people who really had very, very strong orthodox views were little groups of there were little slices of people out here, and the vast majority of the population were people who went to church or synagogue and they believed, but they believed very mildly. If you asked them questions about it, they didn't like to talk about it. They believed in kind of general terms, and that's where most people were. Increasingly, we have more secular people and more religious people at the same time in our society. Now, what that means is, increasingly, we actually have to learn to sympathetically understand why, if you don't believe in God or Christianity, why people do. You need to be able to understand it and articulate it very well. And if you do believe in God, and let's say Christianity in particular, I'm a Christian minister, so when I get into the particulars of religion, I'm going to go there. That's what I know. But if you do believe, and you see all these people around who doubt, you need to be able to sympathetically enter into their non-belief and be able to articulate it. See, right now, everybody just dismisses the other side. And you're not going to have a civil society that way. You just aren't. And I got a chance to do something like this talk at the Google campus in Mountaintop, California, which is the main Google campus. And they have something called Authors at Google, which is a series, and they have authors come in and present the book and talk and ask questions. It was a great time. In fact, I haven't seen it, but somebody told me it's on YouTube as of today. And everybody who does Authors at Google signs a release form. They stick it up on YouTube. They own it. However, everybody told me that there were only two. That my talk on, and I'm not a very well-known person, so they didn't come because I was there. They came because of the subject, religion, and why do people believe and why people disbelieve. The only other author that got as big a crowd as me was Violet Blue, who's an internet porn star. And everybody told me the reason is because these are the two subjects nobody knows how to talk about. They're extremely similar. We don't want to talk about religion because everybody just gets upset, which is why I never talked to my parents or my grandparents about sex, because they just got upset. And now actually we're a little better at sex than religion, but they're still there they are, and we're not going to move forward in our society because secularism and religion are both growing enormously at the same time. I know secular people say we're being overrun by fundamentalists, and conservative, religious people say we're being overrun by secularism and unbelief. The fact is they're both right, actually. And we're going to have to understand each other to get along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you what I see. And of course, I'm coming from a belief point of view. I'd like to give you an overview, a kind of helicopter ride, then we'll have questions and answers. A helicopter ride on reasons people, as far as I can see, don't believe Christianity. Things that make Christianity implausible. Things that are difficult for them to understand, to why Christianity doesn't make sense to them. But in the process, since I'm coming from a belief side, as we go through all the reasons people don't believe Christianity, I'm going to also show you in the process a lot of the reasons that people do. So let me break it down into three categories. People don't believe in Christianity, I think, because of three categories of things. One is because they don't see the faith it takes to doubt Christianity and God. First, people don't see the faith it takes to doubt it. Secondly, they don't see the problems they have without it. And thirdly, they don't see the beauty that they could find in it. Now let me go back through that now, all right? It's helicopter ride. I'm going to go for about till 8:15, then we're going to have 45 minutes of questions, okay? And this will be sketchy, because I'd rather give you an overview and just tell you about these topics. And then if you want more, you can come back, okay? So first of all, a lot of people do not go toward Christianity and they doubt it and they dislike it because they don't see how much faith it takes to doubt it. Is that a surprising statement to you? It takes a tremendous amount of faith to doubt God, the existence of God and Christianity. How so? What I mean is, if you look at the things that people express their doubts, I can't believe in God or I can't believe in Christianity because of X. If you look down into the doubt, you'll see a huge leap of faith. And almost always that leap of faith is not identified as what it is. And as a result, it actually has less justification and less warrant than the faith that's being doubted. Let me show you. The classic doubt is, I can't believe in a God who would allow evil and suffering in the world. I just can't believe in a God who would allow so much pointless, senseless evil and suffering. And on the surface, that's hard. But let's just take a look. A number of philosophers have been taking a look. When people say, God would not allow pointless evil and suffering, therefore I can't believe in God. If there's a truly powerful, all-good God, he wouldn't allow it. He is allowing it, so he doesn't exist, that kind of thing. But the assumption, and it's a leap of faith, the assumption is, because you can't think of any good reason why God would allow evil and suffering, therefore there can't be a good reason. Because you can't perceive of what point there might be for him allowing it. By the way, I can't perceive it either. I'm not holding back on you. But just because we can't perceive it doesn't mean it can't be one. One philosopher puts it like this. If I had a pup tent right here, and I asked one of you, please look inside the pup tent and tell me if there's any St. Bernards in here. And if you looked inside and you didn't see any St. Bernards, it would be safe to say that since you couldn't see any St. Bernards in the pup tent, there probably aren't any St. Bernards there. Because if there are St. Bernards, you'd see them. They're obvious to the eye. But if I asked you to look inside the pup tent and tell me, do you see any mosquitoes in there? And if you looked inside and you say, I don't see any mosquitoes, that doesn't mean there aren't any. Right? Because just because you can't see any doesn't mean there aren't any. Now, the philosopher says, if there are any good reasons why God would allow evil and suffering to continue, are they more like St. Bernards or like mosquitoes? Are they things that you would, certainly if there were any good ideas, any good reasons, surely they would be perceived by you? No, of course not. To say just because I can't think of any good reason, therefore there can't be any, and yet that's the whole premise on which the argument against God's existence on the basis of evil rests. If you have a God big and powerful enough to be mad at because he won't stop evil and suffering, then at the very same moment you've got a God big and powerful enough to have reasons for allowing it that you can't think of. You can't have it both ways. If he's big enough to be mad at, he's big enough to know something you don't know. And therefore, in the heart of your terrible doubt, and it's a doubt, I struggle with it too, evil and suffering. But in the heart of the doubt, if it pulls you totally away and says, therefore I can't believe in God, it's because you've done a leap of faith. And that leap of faith is, if there are good reasons, my brain would be perceiving it. They're like St. Bernards, not like mosquitoes. Well, let me give you another doubt, which has faith hidden in it. Another doubt goes like this. People say, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is a problem for Christianity, but Islam too. Christianity, Islam would say, we're the one true religion. People who don't believe are lost. We're the one true religion. And many people here in the West say that's terrible. There can't just be one true religion. All religions have part of the truth, but no religion sees all the truth. So no religion should say, we see the whole truth and we are the supreme and the best religion. There's a problem with that, though. Michael Polanyi, who was a scientist and a philosopher, points out that idea that all religions only see part of the truth and no religion can see the whole truth is itself an astounding claim. You know the illustration that people use to kind of get this across, which is the elephant and the blind men, right? There's 5 blind men, they're walking along and they encounter the elephant. Now keep in mind, they're blind, and it's an elephant, so that encounter must be a fairly painful one. And whenever people give the illustration, they never go into that part, and I wish they would, but we won't. So, five blind men find the elephant. Every one of them is holding on a different place. One blind man's holding on to the trunk, one's holding on to the tail, one's holding on to the legs, and everyone is trying to describe the whole elephant by the part that they sense. And of course, none of them can see the whole elephant. Every one of them only has part of the elephant. No one can see the whole elephant, and therefore no religion has the right to say they see the whole elephant. Sounds humble, doesn't it? What Michael Polanyi points out is something very interesting. He says, how could you know all the blind men only see part of the elephant unless you, the storyteller, can see the whole elephant? If you were only equally blind, in other words, if you were at the same level with all other human beings and all other religious people, in other words, if your take on spiritual reality was equal to everybody else's, if you were equally blind as they, you couldn't know that no one can see the whole truth. The only way you can know that no one sees the whole truth is if you, the storyteller, assume that you see what no one else can see. If you say, I don't know which religion is true, that may be a statement of humility. But if you say no one can know which religion is true, because no religion sees all the truth, that is being dogmatic and presuming that you have a far better view of ultimate reality than any of the other religions, and that's the very claim you're criticizing. It's an enormous leap of faith for you to say, no one can see all the truth. And not only is it a leap of faith, but it's actually inconsistent, because you're actually claiming a superior take on spiritual reality than all the various religions. And so, again, it's a real problem. I'm not saying that division in the world between religions isn't a problem. I'm just simply saying that this is that argument, and that therefore there can't be a God, or therefore Christianity can't be true, or Islam can't be true because it claims to be one true religion, falls flat, because you have as big a leap of faith in the middle of your doubt as any of the leaps of faith that Christians or Muslims or any other religion are asking from their adherents. Let me give you a third one. Doubt number 3, you might say. Doubt number 3 is really a kind of cumulative doubt. There's actually about 3,000 doubts in this one doubt, so it's very efficient use of our time. And it goes like this. I can't believe Christianity. I can't believe the Bible, because in the Bible there's this stuff. There's this statement, there's this teaching, there's this incident, there's this passage. Now, the reason I said there's 3,000 doubts in this doubt is that everybody's got problems with different parts of the Bible, but you fill in the blank. I can't believe in a Bible or a scripture that teaches blank or X or Y or Z. It's regressive, it's offensive, it's terrible, I just can't believe it. But let's talk about that for a minute. Where's the leap of faith here? When you say, I can't believe the Bible because this part of it is just very regrettable. Well, where's the leap of faith? I'll tell you where it is. You are, at that point, showing enormous faith in your cultural moment. Now, let me break that down. Culture, moment. Okay. In our culture, Boston, Harvard, we read the Bible, and we get to the place where it says, no vengeance. 70 times 7, you must forgive. No matter what people do to you, you must forgive. No one must take vengeance. And we say, go on. All right, go. That's good. Then you get to the place that says, no sex outside marriage. Sex is only for a covenant relationship, is only for, full lifetime committed relationship. No sex outside marriage. We go, that's regressive. That's, primitive. That's a throwback. Fine. Okay, let's take the Bible over to some other culture. Let's take it to a traditional culture. There's quite a lot of traditional cultures in the world, in Asia, Latin America, Africa. Let's take it to a traditional culture, and they sit down, they start reading, and they get to that place where it says, no sex outside marriage. They say, good, that's right. Family values, that's good. I haven't ever read the Bible before, but we like this part. And then you get to the thing, no vengeance. No vengeance? No matter what they do to you, no matter what they do to your family, no vengeance. That's nuts. Okay. Now, see, here's the thing. You're very bent out of shape because from your cultural position, this part of the Bible is absolutely, unacceptable. So why should your culture sensibility trump their culture sensibility? They think that's a great idea, that no sex outside marriage. Do you really want to say that my culture is superior to all other cultures, therefore my cultural sensibilities and the things that offend my cultural sensibilities are real problems with the Bible? I mean, that's the real problems with the Bible. And let's think about moment for a second. Some of you are pretty young, so your grandparents are pretty young. In fact, some of you look like your grandparents might be my age. So, maybe not quite. But most of you are going to find this, that you're going to love your grandparents and about a third of the things that they believe you're going to be utterly embarrassed about. I mean, didn't Obama even say that the other day? Right. In other words, you look back 2 or 3 generations to your grandparents or even your great-grandparents, and you see the things that they believed, and you're just embarrassed by the things that they've said and believed. Right? Okay. You do realize, don't you, that about a third to a half of the things that you believe right now and that all of your friends believe, and here you are in the middle of Harvard, that your grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to be utterly embarrassed about half the stuff that right now you are sure are right. Right? Okay? Or has that thought never occurred to you? And don't you think you ought to be sort of looking your stuff over a little bit to see, I wonder which of these things might be the things that I'm going to embarrass my grandchildren over? No, you're not probably thinking very far ahead, are you? But you know what I'm trying to say? If you say, I'm not going anywhere near the Bible or Christianity because this offends my cultural sensibility, when half of your cultural sensibility is going to be obsolete in 50 years, unless you are sure that you've finally come to the ultimate cultural moment. And that's not going to happen to my grandchildren. Don't be ridiculous. And so here's the problem. To say, I'm just going to get rid of that part of the Bible that offends me, and I don't... Listen, if the Bible, just for a moment, for the sake of argument, if the Bible actually was truth from God, and if it really has come down from God and is not the product of just one particular culture, right? If it really was truth from God, it would offend every culture at some point. And it would offend every century at some point. And therefore, if it offends you, that's what you would expect if it was the truth. And so, we see what a leap of faith it is? A huge leap of faith. Trust in your cultural moment. Let me give you one more doubt, because we have to move on here. One other way that people really doubt the existence of God, let's say, in this case, is they say, well, I doubt the existence of God because unless you can prove God to me, unless you can prove empirically, give me a slam dunk argument, I don't have to believe in God at all. There is no God unless you can prove him to me. And the argument goes, if you come to me and say, oh, you really ought to have faith in the abominable snowman, the answer is no. Until you can prove to me that the abominable snowman exists, I'm not going to believe in that. Until you can prove that this island in the Pacific exists, there's no reason for me to believe in that. And so don't tell me you just have to have faith in God. Until you can prove that there's a God, he doesn't exist. I don't have to believe in it. Sounds really hard-nosed, doesn't it? Really skeptical and hard-nosed and rational, but there's an enormous leap of faith in there. You know what it is? It's actually it's a huge leap of faith. It's theological. Here's why. If you actually had a God that existed inside the universe, like an island in the Pacific, like the abominable snowman, maybe you could say you have to be able to prove God. But if there was a creator God who created the universe, why would he fit inside like an object? C.S. Lewis put it like this. After Khrushchev actually said that they had sent a Russian cosmonaut into space and he'd gone up into the heavens and he hadn't seen God. That was the Russian premier made that comment. C.S. Lewis wrote a kind of funny rejoinder in which he said, if there was a creator God, you wouldn't relate to that God the way a person in the first story relates to a man in the second story. So if you just go upstairs, are you here? You would relate, if God created the world, you would relate to God the way Shakespeare relates to Hamlet. And Hamlet is not going to find anything out about Shakespeare by going backstage or just, doing a survey or no, the only way Shakespeare is going to, Hamlet's going to know anything about Shakespeare is if Shakespeare writes something about himself into the play. Unless he writes some information in. Otherwise, Hamlet's not going to know a doggone thing. And so here's the problem. If you say, I can only believe in God if you prove him to me, you're actually assuming something about the nature of this God. You're assuming he's not a transcendent creator, which is, of course, the very thesis before us. And so there's a great leap of faith. Now, here, all I'm trying to say is all of the arguments that purport to prove the non-existence of God or the non-feasibility of Christianity, all the slam dunk arguments say, this is why these things can't be true. They all fall short because inside themselves they have unprovable faith assumptions. And you know what this means? This is the first thing I'm trying to get across. Do you realize how much faith it takes not to believe in God now? To put it this way, since you can't prove the non-existence of God. You just can't. I just tried to show you why not. Therefore, if you're living as if there's no God, though there might be a God, there might be a God, that's risky, which means to live as if there is no God when you can't prove there is no God is an act of faith. Taking your life into your hands is a spiritual commitment. And Blaise Pascal, in his Pensées, says that to believe in God, not to believe in God, or even to say, I don't know if there's a God, which means you're living as if there's no God, is a radical spiritual commitment. Every single person in this room is living a life on the basis of faith, some unprovable assumptions about God, taking your life into your hands. Do you see that? Do you see what an amazing amount of faith it takes to doubt God and Christianity? And if you haven't thought of it like that, maybe you've learned something, or at least you're going to consider something, okay? But the second plank, the second thing I'd like to show you is, the second reason people don't believe in God and Christianity is they don't think about the implications of their non-belief. They don't see the problems that come when you don't believe in God. Now, put positively, I would say that many of the things we see in the world today make far more sense if there is a God than if there's not. Or put another way, non-belief in God finds a number of things incredibly problematic. And therefore, these things that I'm going to show you make much more sense if there is a God than if there's not. Now, that's not proving that there's a God. It's just trying to say that belief in God makes a lot more sense of the world than non-belief in God. And that's, if you come to that conclusion, that's taking it, that's moving ahead. Here, let me show you. What do I mean by these things? Okay, the first thing that makes much more sense if there is a God than if there's not. And it becomes a problem if you believe if you don't believe in God, is what's called the fine-tuning of the universe. And a lot of you, especially if you're in the sciences and all that, you know what I'm talking about. Some people have called it the anthropic principle. The fine-tuning of the universe means that the constants and regularity, the fundamental regularities and constants of physics, like the speed of light, the gravitational constant, the weak and strong nuclear forces, all of these things, if you can think of them as dials, organic life and human life would be impossible unless about 100 of these constants and regularities weren't set and calibrated right where they are. It's almost like there's 100 dials, and if every single dial is not set exactly where it's set, there'd be no organic life. And the chances of all of these things happening all at once so that organic and human life could grow is trillion to one, quadrillion to one. You've probably heard about this. So it looks like somebody designed the world for us. Well, now, what atheists will say, and secular people will say, Dawkins, for example, will say, is, nah. He says, I'm sorry, that doesn't prove there's the existence of God. And by the way, he's right. Because what he says is, it could be at the Big Bang that a quadrillion parallel universes were all formed, and we don't even know about any of the others. But we happen to be in the one, of course, which just happens to be one that grows organic human life, And we just happen to be in it. That doesn't prove the existence of God. Sure, it's a 1 in a trillion. Sure, it's a 1 in a quadrillion chance. It doesn't prove anything. It just happened. Okay, and he's right. But keep this in mind. Philosopher Alvin Plantinga has a great thought experiment in relationship to this. He says, imagine that you're at a poker game, and the guy who's dealing has just dealt 20 hands of poker. You played 20 hands of poker. And every single time he's dealt himself 20 straight hands of 4 aces. Okay? So 20 times he's come up with 4 aces, and he did the dealing. So the 20th time, you see he's got 4 aces. I can see a lot of you do not play poker. And so by the way, just for those of you who may not have played poker, 4 aces is good. Okay. So the 20th time, you get up and you throw your cards down, and you just get ready to punch him, and he suddenly says in this thought experiment, wait, I know it looks suspicious, but what if there were an infinite succession of universes so that for any possible distribution of possible poker hands, there is one universe in which this possibility is realized? We just happen to find ourselves in the one universe where I always deal myself 4 aces without cheating. If there's a quadrillion universes out there, there's got to be one. And why couldn't that be the case? You can't prove that I'm cheating. And the philosopher's point is, he's right. It could be a 1 in a quadrillion chance. You couldn't disprove the card player's thesis, but you're going to punch him anyway. And you know why? Because nobody lives as if 1 in a trillion, 1 in a quadrillion chances actually happen. You assume they haven't happened. You assume that he must have done it deliberately. And see, now when you take a look at the universe and you admit, as Dawkins and Dennett and a lot of these folks admit, they all talk about this fine-tuning argument in all their books, which shows that they sense the strength of it, or they wouldn't all be dealing with it. And what they say is, well, that doesn't mean there has to be a God. It could be a 1 in a trillion chance, but you don't live like that any other place, any other way. It would be silly to. The fine-tuning of the universe makes vastly more sense, 1 trillion times more sense, if there is a God than if there's not. And if you want to say, well, it doesn't prove God, no, I'm not trying to prove God. I'm just trying to say it makes more sense if there's a God. That's all. Second, love. If there is no God, then everything about your brain is the product of just natural selection. By the way, I don't want anybody to start. Well, you can ask me afterwards if you want to. I'm not trying to say there's no such thing as natural selection or there's no such thing as adaptation of species, but if there's no God, it's an unguided, blind process. And everything about your mind is there only because it helped your ancestors survive and get their body parts where they needed to be in order to pass on your genetic code. So if you feel love is significant, it's only because you've been programmed to do so. It's a chemical reaction. You've been programmed to do so. People who feel that about, people have that kind of chemical explosion in their brain called love, for various reasons, pass on their genetic code. That's it. And what does that mean? C.S. Lewis puts it like this. Let's suppose there is no God. Let's suppose that nature is all that exists. Then this meaningless play of atoms in time and space by a series of hundredth chances has produced things like ourselves. Conscious beings who now know that their own consciousness is an accidental result of the whole meaningless process and is therefore itself meaningless, though to us it feels significant. But it has to feel significant. That's the only way we could pass on our genetic code. You might decide, once you realize that that's all that love is, you might decide, if there is no God, to simply have as good a time as possible. But it is very difficult to have a good time except in the lowest animal sense. And be in love with a girl. It's very difficult to be in love with a girl if you know and keep on remembering that all the beauties both of her person and of her character are a momentary and accidental pattern produced by the collision of atoms, and your own response to them is a kind of psychic phosphorescence arising from the behavior of your genes. You can't go on getting very serious pleasure from music if you know and keep remembering that since there is no God, its air of significance is a pure illusion and that you like it only because your nervous system is irrationally conditioned to do so. You may still, in the very lowest sense, have a good time, but just insofar as these experiences become very good, just insofar as they ever threaten to push you from cold sensuality into real warmth and enthusiasm and joy, so far will you be forced to feel the hopeless disharmony between your own emotions and the universe in which you believe you live. Now, what he's saying is, if there is no God, then the feeling of love is utterly insignificant. It feels significant. That's how it gets you to pass on your genetic code. But it's insignificant. It's an accidental thing that happened. You're an accident. And not only that, if you live a life of cruelty rather than a life of love, or if you live a life of love instead of a life of cruelty, eventually the universe burns up, the sun goes out, and there's oceans of dead time. Even 20,000 years, even 200,000 years of human civilization, compared to the oceans of dead time before and the oceans of dead time that come afterwards, makes it, insignificant. And nothing you do will make any difference. Nothing you do will make any lasting difference at all. Therefore, not only does the origin of love, if there is no God, mean it's insignificant, but the results of love, if there is no God, means it's insignificant. And you know what you're going to do? If you don't believe in God, you're going to say, forget that. I just know love is significant, and I'm just going to live that way. And I'm good. I want you to. You're going to have, as Lewis says, you're going to have a miserable life if you actually live consistent with your belief that there is no God. Because what you're really saying is, that doesn't prove there's a God. No, it doesn't. It just, all I know is that the significant, if there is a God, significance of love makes perfect sense. If there is no God, you're flying in the face of what you actually believe. See, if you have a premise, there is no God, that leads to a conclusion you know is wrong, that love is insignificant. Why not change the premise? What's your problem? So all I'm trying to say is not, this doesn't prove God. What I just did not prove God. It just says love makes a whole lot more sense if there is a God than if there's not. Let me give you a third one. Morality in general. Carolyn Fleur-Loban, I don't know where she is now, but some years ago she wrote an article I think she was at the University of Rhode Island. She's a cultural anthropologist, and she wrote an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education. And she said it was an amazing article. And she, though she was an American cultural anthropologist, she worked a lot amongst indigenous peoples. I think it was in Africa. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was in Africa. And she said after a number of years of working, she had a major problem. And the major problem was pretty simple. She says, as a secular person, her understanding is that since there is no God and there is no transcendent moral order, that morality is relative and socially constructed, and individuals can come up with their own belief in what is right for them, but there's really no basis on which you can say to somebody else, you need to do this or that. See, here's the problem. If there is no God, there may be a basis for your moral feelings. You may have a very deep conviction that slavery is wrong. You just know it's wrong. But here's the question. What do you say to a person who is enslaving someone who doesn't feel it's wrong? If there is no God, you can have a moral feeling. But if there's no God, what she was realizing is there's no basis for talking about moral obligation. Because moral obligation is saying you need to behave like this whether you have that moral feeling or not. Now, who's to say your moral feeling trumps hers or his? What do you appeal to? And she had nothing to appeal to. And here's her problem. She also, being a cultural anthropologist, was trained not to say to some other culture that my culture is better than your culture. But she was witnessing female genital mutilation, which is also euphemistically called female circumcision. And she saw oppression of women, and it infuriated her. And when she would talk to some of the leaders in the communities where she was working, even a little bit, they would say, hey, don't you bring your white Western Enlightenment, individualistic understanding of universal human rights and tell us that your culture is better than our culture? What right have you got, what warrant have you got for telling us that what we think is perfectly fine isn't? And she realized she had absolutely no answer. She said that in the article. She had no way, she had nothing to appeal to. She had no way to ground moral obligation without the existence of God. You know what she said? She decided, though, she was going to work for female human rights in Africa anyway. She says, I don't know what to say. She says, I have to do it. I just realized that as a secular person, I've got no basis for it. I got no warrant for telling them that what they're doing is wrong. But I just know that, now here, it's very similar. If there is no God, that would lead you to think, or I put it this way. If your premise that there is no God leads you to a conclusion that there is no such thing as moral obligation, which you know is wrong, why not change the premise? She wouldn't. She just said, it doesn't prove there's a God. I know it doesn't prove there's a God. But moral obligation makes so much more sense if there is a God than if there isn't. Let me give you one more. And this is actually a practical one, because then I have to kind of run on here to the end, I think, to my last point. Meaning. This is a really practical one. Viktor Frankl, who was a Jewish, I think he was a psychologist, I'm not sure. Was he a psychiatrist? Yeah, okay. Well, he was put in the death camps. He was put in the concentration camps, and he survived. And when he came out, he wrote a classic called Man's Search for Meaning. It is, I think, very underappreciated. But here's what he saw. And this is what I got from reading the book, and it was very powerful. Now, by the way, this is not a case for Christianity. This is a case for God. But listen, it's not a case for Christianity per se. He noticed that the people in the concentration camp, under incredible pressure, they were stripped of everything. They were stripped of their wealth. They were stripped of their social status. They were stripped of their clothes. They were stripped very often of their family members. Very often their family members were taken away from them. They were stripped of their jobs, their homes, everything. And he found that there were three responses. One kind of person became cruel and in some cases evil. There were some prisoners that began to steal other prisoners' food, do anything to survive, including collaborate with the enemy, collaborate with the Germans, the Nazis. So they became cruel or evil. The second group just shriveled up. They almost literally curled up into balls and died. In some cases, they actually literally did it. But it just meant you could just see them collapse. They couldn't think outside. They didn't look at anybody else. They didn't see anybody else. They just saw themselves and their problems, and they just collapsed. And it was a third group of people who maintained an ability to love and serve and sacrifice for other people. The first two were utterly absorbed in themselves. They were just sucked in. And only one of the three groups was able to maintain a certain amount of hope, a certain amount of, not hope for getting out, but it was just a love, a caring for their neighbor, as it were. And by the way, if I remember correctly, they were not three equal-sized groups. The first group was small, the third group was small, the middle group was probably the biggest. And he said, when he got out, he reflected on it. He said, now why in the world would people, and probably these are all Jewish people, of course, and they were all German Jews, Polish, they were European Jews. And so why would they respond so differently? And here's what he decided. It's in the title of the book. Everybody lives for something. Everybody lives for something. But if you live for your career, if you live for your family, if you live for human approval, if you live for power, if you live for influence, if you live for social status, if you live for, in other words, what gives you meaning in life? What is the thing you're living for? And here's what he said. Almost everybody, he realized, was living for things that the concentration camp could take away. The only people who stayed heroic, the only people who stayed sane, were people whose main meaning in life was not something a concentration camp could take away from them. And I don't know what that is, by the way. You may say, well, what would that be? Well, all I know is it would have to be awfully spiritual now, wouldn't it? Because if you're living for your career, if you're living for human approval, if you're living for approval, power, comfort, control, if you're living for anything other than God or spirit, in other words, something. But in other words, you better have a spiritual dimension to your life, because you know what? You probably aren't going to be in a concentration camp, but I can tell you a lot of the things that you mean the most to you are going to be stripped away from you. Are you going to curl up into a ball? Now, lastly, so what I'm trying to say is, if there is a God, that's what you live for. And you can take concentration camps. If there is a God, the fine-tuning of the universe makes sense. If there is a God, the significance of love makes sense. If there is a God, human rights and moral obligation makes sense. And if there's not a God, those things, you can believe in them, but you can have a bigger leap of faith, don't you? To believe those things are significant in spite of what you believe about the universe and about God, than if you actually believed in God. Do you see the problem that non-belief brings? Just have the integrity to see it and consider a question. If all these things make more sense if there is a God than there is not a God, what's your problem with believing in God? Now, lastly, I would say the last reason people don't find Christianity plausible is because I don't think they understand the beauty of what's inside it. Let me just give you 3 examples that I think are beautiful. Now, by the way, if you haven't heard anything like this, it's probably because we Christians aren't very beautiful in the way we live or the way we talk. I can't help the fact, I'm a perfect example of this. Many of us Christians are certainly not beautiful in the way we look, but there's not much we can do about it. Diet a little bit, but that doesn't help me anyway. Here's 3. Let me just tell you 3 things that the Bible, the Christian gospel teaches, and then we'll have questions. One of the things the Christian gospel teaches is the incarnation of love. What's incarnation? Well, do you remember how I said that if there was a God, we'd relate to him the way Shakespeare relates to Hamlet, that he'd have to write something of himself in? Dorothy Sayers was one of the first women to ever graduate from Oxford. She was also a detective novelist, and probably her most famous detective creation was Lord Peter Wimsey, and she wrote a long, bunch of novels and stories. And he was a detective, and he solved the case. He was an aristocrat. He was idiosyncratic. He's a neat guy. You may have seen some of it. That stuff's been made into movies, TV, etc. Halfway through the series, Peter Wimsey is a single guy. Halfway through the series, a female character named Harriet Vane shows up. She was one of the first women who ever graduated from Oxford. She's a writer of detective novels. She meets Peter Wimsey. They have a kind of tempestuous, strange courtship. They fall in love and get married and live happily ever after. What happened there, class? The creator of that world, Dorothy Sayers, looked into that world and looked at her main character, Lord Peter Wimsey, and fell in love with him and saw he needed somebody and entered that world, wrote herself into that world, and saved him, and they lived happily ever after. Isn't that lovely? I can do you better. Well, you know what the gospel is? You know what the word incarnation means? God looks into the world that he created, and he sees us flailing. He loves us. He can't say he falls in love with us because he made us out of love, but he falls in love with us, and he writes himself in the person of Jesus Christ. He comes to rescue us. He comes to save us. That's another subject, another lecture. To save us, to marry us, so we can live happily ever after. That's pretty neat. Let me give you a second one. Atonement, the atonement of grace. You know Charles Dickens' famous novel, The Tale of Two Cities? It's about Sidney Carton and Charles Darnay, and they love the same person. They love Lucy. And however, what happens is that Lucy has to choose, and she chooses Charles, and they get married, and they have a child. Sidney Carton loves Lucy enough that he really, though it breaks his heart, he wishes them well, etc. But at the end of the story, this is during the time of the French Revolution, Charles Darnay is captured by the French Revolution, and he's put in the Bastille, and he's going to be guillotined the next day. He's going to be executed. And he's been caught, and he's in there. Sidney Carton, who looks quite a bit like Charles Darnay, he and a couple of friends steal in, disguised, into the prison, and Sidney Carton meets Charles and Sidney says to Charles, I want to take your place. I want to die in your place. You've got a wife. You've got a child. You've got something to live for. And Charles says, no way. I'm not going to let you do that. I'm not going to let you do that. So Sidney, like a very good friend, knocks him unconscious. And the two friends steal Charles out. Sidney takes Charles's clothes on and takes his place. And of course, Charles is saved for Lucy, saved for his child. And Sidney Carton waits to be executed. The next day, there's a woman, a young woman, a little seamstress, a girl, basically, who's also going to be guillotined, who knew Charles Darnay, comes up and tries to talk to him. You know, Sidney kind of turns away, but the seamstress finally realizes this is not Charles. And she suddenly realizes it's somebody taking Charles's place. And her eyes get big, and she says, are you dying for him? And Sidney says, yes, for him, his wife, and his child. And the seamstress says, you know, I didn't think I could handle facing my own death. But Mr. Stranger, if you would hold my hand, if somebody as brave as you could hold my hand, I probably could face it. Now, his substitutionary sacrifice, his giving his life to save someone, his substitutionary sacrifice changed her life, and it wasn't even for her. What if you actually believe that God in the person of Jesus Christ came into this world, made himself vulnerable, and took in himself the things that we all deserve for our failures? You know, how would that change you if you believe that Jesus Christ was your substitutionary sacrifice? Yours. That's beautiful. One last thing. Christians don't believe that the final future is an ethereal, esoteric, non-material, spiritual state. We believe at the end of time, God will come down and heal this creation. And therefore, we'll have bodies. And disease will be gone, death will be gone, suffering will be gone, injustice will be gone, violence will be gone. It'll all be gone. This world, we won't be floating around 10 feet above contradiction. We'll be able to dance, be able to hug eternally, perfectly. That's the doctrine of the resurrection, and that is beautiful. We're the only, as far as I know, biblical religion is the only religion that has hope for ordinary life. That eating and drinking and hugging and kissing will go on forever. Not that we somehow go off into outer space at some point and we get a consolation for the life we live down here. Oh, no. The resurrection is the restoration of the life that we never had or the life we had and lost. And so N.T. Wright says this about Christianity. He's a scholar who says he has a lot of liberal secular friends that, you know, really are concerned about justice and disease, etc., and poverty and hunger, and he wonders why they don't want the resurrection to be true. Because he says, if the resurrection isn't true, then, you're working to make the world a better place until the sun burns up and it all goes away anyway. But if the resurrection's true, then and you rehab a home for a poor person, or you give a free medical care to somebody, you're on the side of history. You're on the side of God. There's going to be eternal fruit. And this is what he says. The message of the resurrection is that this world matters, that the problems and pains of this world matter, that the injustices and pains of the present world must now be addressed with the news that healing, justice, and love have won. You see, if Easter means Jesus Christ is only raised in a spiritual sense, then it is only about me and finding a new dimension in my personal and spiritual life. But if Jesus Christ is risen from the dead and the future is a new heavens and new earth, Christianity becomes good news for the world, news which warms our hearts precisely because it isn't just about warming hearts. Easter means that in a world where injustice, violence, and degradation are endemic, God is not prepared to tolerate such things. And we will plan with all the energy of God to implement the victory of Jesus over them all. Take away Easter, and Karl Marx was probably right to accuse Christianity of ignoring problems of the material world. Take away Easter, and Freud was probably right to say Christianity is wish fulfillment. Take away Easter, and Nietzsche was probably right to say it was for wimps. But let's not take away Easter. Okay, so that's the beauty that many people don't see. Those are the problems that many people won't face. Those are the faith. That's the faith that in your doubts that many people don't recognize. And for those reasons, people have trouble believing in Christianity. But if you see through what I just said, you'll see Christianity makes a great deal of sense. And even if you don't accept that, if you say, I don't want to be a Christian, I want to believe in God, you need to be able to sympathetically understand why so many people do, if we're going to be co-citizens and neighbors in this society and world. Thank you. Yeah, I'll do it. Oh, okay. I'll keep this on.
Go ahead.
Thanks very much for coming tonight and for sharing your thoughts with us. I think you made a fairly convincing argument as to the fact that there's a good reason to believe that there is a God, but that only gets us to the first step. So the question I have is, what's your argument, or how do you determine what form God takes? I'm somebody who believes that there is a spiritual being out there, but
Right.
I don't know that argument that you made gets me any closer to believing in any specific type of God, other than that there's some kind of extra being beyond humanity.
Well, I don't really want to have to come back, but maybe. Now there's no such thing as a talk that hits everybody. I mean, for people that are having trouble even believing in God, I think that does address them. And it also makes the Jews, the Muslims, the Christians, and all the various believers in God makes feel briefly for some unity. As soon as I start saying, here's why Christianity, I think, makes more sense than the other religions, that's what I have to say. Can I give you a thumbnail on that?
Sure.
I'll tell you where here's where I tell you to look. I would tell you to look. Unlike most of the other religions are, a prophet comes and says, here's how to find God, and shows us the way to live. And so you can compare, here's Buddhism, here's Islam, here's Confucianism. They all have different approaches to how to live life in a way that connects with God. Christianity is pretty different. I mean, it's the only religion in which you have a founder who says, not I'm a prophet, come to show you how to find God, but I'm God, come to find you. I mean, none of the other prophets said anything like the sort of things Jesus said about himself. So that actually makes things easier. Instead of saying, I need to go to the Bible, what about the wars in the Old Testament, what about creation and evolution, what about all this stuff? Don't go there. What you ought to do is you ought to say, number one, you need to see whether you can trust what the New Testament Gospels tell you about Jesus as being historically reliable. If you have no confidence in that, you can't weigh things. So you'd have to read a book like Richard Bauckham's Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, which is a tremendous new and top-level scholarly book showing that the Gospels are eyewitness accounts. They're eyewitness histories, not oral traditions that were legendary that came down over the years. The second step then, after coming to the place where you could trust the Gospels, is giving you a pretty historically reliable view of what God did, of what Jesus said and did. Then you have to weigh his claims and the resurrection. And the resurrection, I think there's an enormously it's a very difficult case to dismiss. And Besides the Balkan book, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, I would read N.T. Wright's The Resurrection of the Son of God, in which he basically says there's no historically possible alternate explanation for the birth of the Christian church than the bodily resurrection. And for some of us, that's so off our radar, it's hard for you to even imagine somebody can make a cogent. But it's a 700-page, high-level historic study of that. And if you could look at those two books, that would take you miles ahead of most people in understanding whether Christianity makes sense or not. Now, if you're going to ask me more about any of that, somebody else should ask, because I don't want to take longer. But that's the direction I would go. Okay?
Can you just spell Bauckham for me?
Bauckham. He's a professor, a Bible scholar from St. Andrews University in Scotland. Hi.
If one accepts that God created us in his own image, and one then accepts that the distinguishing point between man and other mammals is rationality and intellect, then why does God make the means to know him through faith and something that doesn't utilize our rationality and intellect?
Now, that was very well stated. And you said, if this and if this and this, I don't agree with your second if. So your first if is we're made in the image of God. The second if is that what makes us different from mammals and animals is rationality. Is that what you just said? Well, see, wait a minute. The image of God, every part of you is in the image of God, not just your rationality. So your emotions, your social aspect, your personal aspect, your emotional aspect, your rational aspect, you wouldn't want to say your reason is more reflective of God's image than your body. And therefore, faith is not opposite to reason, but faith includes reason, but it's more than reason, right? A good example of this is if I what a wonderful group of people I have here in this front row, and I'm looking to hire a new person for my organization, and I need to figure out which of these fine young students would be the best person for the job. What I would do is, let's just assume they'd want it, but what I would do is I'd use my reason to try to I'd interview them, I would give them tests, I would read their references, and I would use my rationality to try to determine which of these folks would be the best person for the job. But the fact is, until I commit to them, I will never be sure. Until I actually hire one, and it's very risky to hire somebody. In other words, there's got to be. I may eventually get to the place where I know absolutely certainly this is the right person. But it's a combination of reason and personal commitment, and so the image of God is not just in your rationality. And therefore, faith is an act of the whole person, not just the reason. So it sounded to me like you're pitting faith a little bit against reason, and you're elevating reason a little bit more than it ought to be. And I hope I would gently and nicely corrective, and that gets, I hope, rid of your problem.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Let's go over here. Go ahead.
Joshua.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. In your chapter on hell, you talk. Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry.
no, wait a minute.
I know.
Wait, you're just supposed to get the book, not read it.
You kind of describe hell not as a place of torment, but just kind of as the natural progression where God lets the soul go where it's going on earth. Is that fair?
No.
No. Okay.
No, of course it's fair. I mean, because you're being fair. I mean, I don't mean you're unfair. No, what I meant was that is the torment. I wouldn't put those. You wouldn't say.
Right.
When you think of torment, you think of brimstone, right? This is every bit as bad. I mean, in other words, the misery and the pain that I try to describe, which is really a self-centered soul going on forever in its trajectory, getting more and more miserable, more and more sure that nobody understands it, more and more isolated. That is, as far as I know, when the Bible talks about images of fire and brimstone, how do I say it? I always say, when people say, "Do you believe in a literal fiery hell?" I would say, I usually say, "Well, no," and then they start to go like that, and then I say, "I'm sure it's a lot worse than fire. I'm sure." See, fire is a symbol for something. Oh, in heaven too, all the stuff about the crowns. It's a symbol for something far better or far worse than we can come up with, so we come up with a vivid symbol. So when people say you don't believe in a hell of literal, I believe in a literal hell, absolutely. But the fire is just an image for a terrible misery, so I consider that torment. And I guess maybe I gave you the impression that I don't believe in torment. I'm just...
No. Well, I mean, I don't want to take too much of your time.
No, go
my,
ahead.
my,
Go ahead.
my question would just be, so that much makes sense. But just about the idea of a loving God who doesn't give some people an opportunity to know him, to know that that's the way they're going. I was just wondering if you feel like there is this natural conscience within us that we know about God, even if people haven't talked to us or we've gotten a bad impression of Christianity from the bad Christians in the world.
I would, well, yeah, that is a problem.
Okay.
There's no doubt about it. Are you actually from Virginia?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, well, you know then.
Yeah, I do.
But sorry, I was a pastor in Virginia for 10 years, so I'm part of the problem. I don't believe God could possibly hold us accountable for loving our neighbor and loving him unless down deep, and Romans 1 says so, down deep we know. In fact, I almost made the case in the talk when I said, when people say, I know there's human rights, but I don't believe in God. Well, another way to put it, biblically, you'd say, you do know there's a God, and you're living as if that God is there. Your mind has taken him out. But with all your senses, all your instincts, you know love is significant. You know that people are important. You know that there's such a thing as a moral obligation and so forth. So, yes, the answer is that whether a person has heard about Jesus or not, the point is that God holds us responsible for loving our neighbors, ourselves, and for recognizing that we're not the center of the universe, that there's a higher power. And, I would agree with that. All the other stumbling block reasons are a problem, and Christians have to take responsibility for it, no matter what state they're from. So, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much for coming.
You're
my
tall.
Yeah.
And that person wasn't. Yeah, that's okay.
My question is, could you explain, you've done it a little bit, but could you explain us the relationship of the gospel with social justice? And do you believe we can have social justice without the gospel?
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. The second question is easier. Yeah. Certainly, because for the reason I mentioned, in a way, I can keep moving on with what I was saying to our man from Virginia a minute ago, is that there's a natural conscience. I mean, if we're all in the image of God, whether we're Christian or Muslim or Jew, the Bible would say because we're in the image of God, we sense in other image bearers a certain sacredness. And when justice is giving people goods that they have a right to. Now, I know there's some debate about that. For example, one of the things I would love for you to provide for me a large flat-screen TV for my home. But you know what? I actually don't have a right I don't have a claim right on you. Right? I can't say you ought to give that to me. On the other hand, if you try to torture me, I can say I have a claim right against you. I have the right to tell that you not torture me. I don't have the right to ask. So there's always going to be a certain amount of debate about that. But justice is people's rights to certain goods as human beings. They have a right not to be tortured. They have a right not to be killed. They have a right not. They have a right to a decent level of life and that sort of thing. And I think actually that not only do most religions have some understanding of justice in them. At the end of C.S. Lewis's book, Abolition of Man, he actually shows that in ethics, even though the idea of God and salvation is different in every religion, in ethics, the way most religions want us to live is very similar. So you can make common cause with people of other religions. And of course, as I try to say here, I believe the average secular person, especially in the West, has a very strong sense of justice, even though you can't ground it very well, I think, without God. It doesn't matter. They're going to go out there and they're going to work too. So you can certainly have social justice without the gospel. However, the relationship of the gospel to social justice is largely, how do I say this? We would see, as Christians, we would see God created the world to be interdependent, and sin has broken the fabric. So whereas people ought to be sharing their goods with each other, we're selfish. And it's our job not only simply to save people's souls, but actually to take them out of their self-centeredness, humble them through grace, so that they begin to interweave their goods, their time, and their money into the community, into the human community, and reweave it. Now, that's called doing justice in the Bible. It's also called strengthening shalom, and shalom is human flourishing. And so there's a very, very, very strong connection of gospel salvation to justice, but you can certainly be for justice without being a Christian. So that's okay.
Hi, how are you? My name is Crystal, and I do not go to Harvard. As somebody who's kind of in the middle, I don't consider myself a Christian, certainly, maybe not even a religious person, and not really secular either.
Okay, yeah.
And also, as we look into, the world is becoming more global, and we're having to deal with people who, in our society, at least coming from our society, having to deal with people who don't, come from a Christian perspective. So, so what if we don't take so much offense or disagreement with Christianity in itself, but maybe, Christians, and we don't consider ourselves, maybe not consider yourself a spiritual person, but maybe not a religious person. First of all, is there a problem with that? Is that so bad? And if that is a problem, spiritual, but not necessarily religious, if there is a problem with that, then why?
I am not sure that. Is it fair, Crystal?
Crystal.
Yeah. Is it fair to say, though, that would it not be fair to say that the same problems a person who doesn't believe in God at all, a more outspoken, overt, I don't believe in God, I'm an atheist or an agnostic, don't you have a lot of the same problems in that situation? So, for example, what do you appeal to when it comes to moral obligation? How do you say to someone in another culture, you really shouldn't oppress women? Aren't you? I mean, don't you have? It's certainly kinder. It's a kinder and gentler kind of secularism. I guess this is listen. This is inadequate. Here we are, and just you and I having this intimate conversation with 400 other people. I mean, it's not fair because I really need to know more about where you're coming from. But I hope this isn't unfair. I would say what it sounds to me like is not really a middle position. I mean, that's my first impression. It seems like a kinder, gentler form of being secular and having a lot of the same problems. When I say problems, though, what I'm really saying. You can certainly be, as I just said to my last friend questioner, is that secular people are for justice. Secular people are share an awful lot of the values of the things that I've been saying are Christian values, and can be co-belligerents against materialism and militarism and injustice with Christians. And when you say how bad is that, I'm really not trying to say secular people are bad either. I'm wondering whether they're missing out. I worry about the meaning issue. I worry about whether they have a meaning in life robust enough to handle the problems, maybe not death camps, but something like that. I wonder whether they really appreciate the beauty of what's offered. So I'm just afraid of you missing out, not you're bad.
Well, if I may make it more specific, for example, I grew up in a place where there were only Buddhist monasteries, and then I moved to Virginia, North Carolina, so overwhelmingly Buddhist, overwhelmingly Christian,
Baptist.
And
Buddhist
Baptist.
Baptist.
And Buddhism being, it of course is a religion, but it's a very different path. It's more of an individual path. And Christianity, it's more the missionary aspect of it that I think is a little bit
off-putting.
Off-putting, yeah.
Okay, you probably better keep moving, but I would say there's two kinds of missionaries. I mean, Jesus said to the Pharisees, you traverse heaven and earth to find to find a convert. He says this to the Pharisees. He says, you scour heaven and earth for a convert just to make him as miserable as yourself. And Pharisees were burdened down with legalism and self-righteousness, and they did everything they could to make other people, convert people so they'd be as miserable as them. And there is a kind of very self-righteous and very coercive form of mission work. And then there's, as you know, if you found the cure for cancer, you'd want to share it. And I would hope, do it in a way to say, look, I hate to tell everybody that I'm right and you're wrong, but my gosh, this is going to help so many people. Nobody would look at a person who thought they had the cure for cancer and thought it was narrow if you said, I think I found it. So it's hard if you're a Christian and you really do think you found, the Messiah, not to want to share it. But the form you've got there, in a lot of cases, is pharisaical. So I would rather you split the difference and see that there really could be a warrant for a sharing of the faith and a mission. But an awful lot of what you've seen is it's fair for you to hate it, frankly. Okay? Sorry,
Thank you.
that's not enough. But anyway, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in with one, because we've got a bunch of cards that
Okay.
have similar questions, so I'm going to just choose this as a representative one.
Good.
If there's a God, why aren't my prayers answered?
I can give you one example. Is I only ever had 2 girlfriends in my life. And when I was... does it sound like a non sequitur to you? Oh, no. I had 2 girlfriends in my life, and the first one, I'm lucky to have ever had 2. The first one, when she broke up with me, I thought I was going to die. I prayed for at least a year every single day, saying, I don't understand, God, why you're doing this. This is the one for me. And then, of course, I married the one for me. And I look back, and this is almost a trivial example, but I look back on the thing and say, if prayer is a gun, thank God there's a safety catch on it. And the safety catch on it is God will give me, God will give me what I would have asked for if I knew everything he knew. So, in other words, he's smarter. That's why sometimes God doesn't answer your prayer. And in some cases, I think that's trivial because it might be you're saying, my mother's dying of cancer, and why didn't he answer my prayers? And therefore, I would really give a much less flip answer on that. But it would still come down in the end to saying, we don't have the vantage point by which we can really be sure that God's being cruel when he doesn't answer your prayer. Okay, you want to go back to the mic? Okay. Yes?
Hi, my name is Louis, and my question is, how do you become a Christian?
How does it happen, or how do you do it if you want to do it?
How do you do it if you want to?
Okay. Because actually, for a lot of us, I would say it takes 3 things. I think if you want to do it, well, actually, I would say 2 things and a third. And if somebody's going to say, why not just say 3? I'll show you why. The 2 things are 2 sides of a coin. The one is repentance, and one is called faith. You've got to always have to do both. Repentance actually is not what you think it is. Okay? So just stop thinking what you're thinking and listen to me. Repentance is, of course, repentance is being sorry for the things you've done wrong. And if you cheated on your income tax and you cheated on your girlfriend and things like that, you lied to your mother and father about things, and you can say, those are sins. But just remember, Pharisees were always sorry for their sins too. They're always sorry for their sins when they sinned. But it kept them Pharisees. Repentance that brings saving connection to God is to find the sin underneath the sin, all sins. And the sin underneath all sins is that you're trying to be your own Savior and your own Lord. You're trying to earn your salvation. You're trying to be, if you are religious, you become a Christian when you realize you've been doing all these good deeds to try to get God to bless you, which means you're really being your own Savior and Lord. If you're irreligious, you realize that you've been basically trying to actualize yourself and develop a self-image on the basis of your performance. And repentance is saying that's a fool's errand. It'll never work. In fact, that's actually putting myself in the place of God. And I realize that I'm lost. And I realize I actually have to, that even my good deeds and bad deeds were self-centered and ways of rebelling against my place as a creature in God's universe, trying to put myself in the center as a God and being my own God. So repentance is really saying, I realize I've been trying to save myself. And faith is saying, I see that what Jesus Christ has done by living and dying, living a perfect life, dying a death for me in my place, paying for my sins, I now ask God to accept me because of what Jesus has done, not what I do. So I transfer my trust from myself and my performance to what Jesus work and performance, and say, God, please accept me by grace. So the repentance is seeing where I've gone wrong. Faith is putting my trust in Christ. Now, what's the third thing? You have to do that through a community and a church. Now, what I think is dangerous is you can't separate repentance and faith from being baptized and being part of a church. You can't just say, well, first I repent and I believe, and then I join a church. Well, it's not that simple, because in some ways you haven't made the handoff. You haven't taken your hands off your own life and given yourself to God if you're not willing, in a way, to sort of publicly profess it and identify, with the community. And so what I say is you do repentance and you do faith, and I think, in fact, if you did it tonight, I would, and you were run over by a bus tomorrow, I think you'd say, Daddy, when you saw God. Just like that. However, if you really want to I think what the Bible calls you to do is personal repentance and faith, and then bring yourself into a community. That's why I would say 1, 2, and 3.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming up. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Tina Dorfer from the Kennedy School, and I would like to link on the first question and the question from Crystal. Your argumentation has been based very much on the uniqueness and partially also the exclusivity of the understanding of Christianity. How do you bring that in line with one of the first Christian principles of tolerance and loving thy neighbor?
Yeah.
And coming back to the parable to which you referred, the 5 blind men and the elephant, aren't you pulling on a leg claiming that this is the whole elephant?
Well, okay, great. This would be the end, and these are great questions. Well, I think I told you, I don't think that blind man elephant thing works at all. Because the only way you could know that I'm one of the blind men is if you're not blind. And therefore you're actually assuming the kind of level of spiritual knowledge that you say nobody's got. So I don't think that works. But you're absolutely right about this your first part, I think, is right in saying the Christian idea of tolerance is based on several things. And you do not have to get rid of the exclusivity for the Christian resources for tolerance to kick in. Let me give you 2. One is everybody's made in the image of God. That's the Christian idea, is whether you're a Jew, a Muslim, a atheist, a Confucianist, image of God equally. And that's the reason. It says, by the way, in Genesis 9, it says, if you shed the blood of a human being, that is horrible, that's wrong, that's unjust. Why? Because every human being is made in the image of God. So no matter who you are, you've got this infinite worth. On the other hand, the Bible also says that everybody's a sinner, which is to say, all of us have flaws, we're self-centered, there's spiritual blindness. Everybody, Christian, non-Christian. In fact, Christians are the ones that are supposed to be the ones who confess that they're sinners, So here, what this means is that, let's just say, here I am, I'm a Christian believer, and here's my friend who's not a believer at all. But the image of God in that person will make that person a better man, I'll just say it's a male, a better man than he should be because of his erroneous beliefs. Let's just for a minute grant that they're erroneous. If he's got erroneous beliefs, but because he's in the image of God, he's actually better than his beliefs. Why? We actually talked about this. He senses God, he senses justice, he senses the value of other people. He may be an atheist. He may say, no, human beings are just animals. And yet because of the image of God, he really reflects God, and he has a sense of the value of people. So the image of God makes a non-believer, Christians, a better person than his erroneous beliefs should make him. And the sin in me makes me a worse person than my supposedly correct beliefs should make me. Do you see that? I do never live up to my correct beliefs. So if I'm worse than my correct beliefs should make me, and he's better than his erroneous beliefs should make him, there's not a great deal of difference in the way we actually live our lives, which, by the way, confuses people. But it's actually a terrific reason for tolerance. Christians say, image of God, that means this person is my neighbor, this person is someone I've got to respect, and this person is really not that different than me in the way in which we actually function out there in the world. Another name for that is called common grace, and the Bible says that God gives grace and wisdom to all people, whether they're believers in God or not. So if I know, for example, in fact, Martin Luther, and he wasn't necessarily the most tolerant man in the world, Martin Luther said, I would rather be ruled by a smart Muslim than a stupid Christian. And what he meant to say is a smart Muslim, which means a Muslim who's gifted by God, to be a good leader. Because every good and perfect gift comes down from God. So Here's a person who's not a believing Christian and yet has these good things. That's common grace. So the doctrine of common grace, the doctrine of the image of God, the doctrine of sin, these three things come together. Christians should not be looking out there saying, oh, these non-Christians, they shouldn't be in office, I shouldn't be working with them. No. Nevertheless, that doesn't, the exclusivity isn't the basis for tolerance or inclusivity. It's these other doctrines. There's a lot of resources in Christian beliefs for tolerance. And you don't have to get rid of the exclusive idea of salvation through Christ. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much.